On today's show, the fateful day is finally here. NBA Draft Lottery 2022. Will the basketball gods be kind to the Houston Rockets and give them the first overall pick, or will they fall all the way down to pick number 5 or land somewhere in between at 2, 3, or 4? Of course, we all have our eyes set on that number 1 pick, but in today's show, we're going to run through our in-house locked on mock draft lottery simulation, the final one before the actual lottery is drawn and done and booked away, where we know what the Houston Rockets actually have to work with in this year's NBA draft. We'll also talk about a couple different potential lottery scenarios, some things to be on the lookout for depending on where that Rockets pick falls. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian, also host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com, use promo code NBA, or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. We do sincerely appreciate that. We are available wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app. Also, check us out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that. The comments really do help. Shout out to everybody who's been wishing me well, wishing me a speedy recovery. I appreciate that. I am going to go by the new nickname, Cotton Ear Joe, because of if you're watching on YouTube, you can see we have a guest appearance by way of a cotton ball shoved into my ear. So, but I do appreciate the YouTube comments, all that stuff. It's awesome. And then, the people who shout out for the algorithm, you're the best as well. For today's episode, we're going to get into some lottery simulation talk. We're going to run through a mock draft that we did in-house with all the Locked On hosts that are part of the NBA Draft Lottery this year, the final lottery sim before the fated day arrives. But what I want from you, if you're watching the show, go to YouTube, let me know what lottery tradition, what superstitious, good vibes thing are you going to do to try and bring good luck to the Houston Rockets this year in the NBA Draft Lottery. Last year, I wore my Mad Max jersey, and so I'm going to wear that again. Lottery day, that's all I'm going to wear all day, starting Tuesday. So I want to know from you, what are you going to use to bring the Rockets good luck going into the 2022 NBA Draft Lottery? But with that, we're going to go through the mock draft, the in-house Locked On mock draft lottery simulation. Then I'm going to go over a couple scenarios that I want you guys to pay attention to in the lottery. What could work, what could be advantageous for the Houston Rockets, depending on how this lottery actually plays out. We'll get to that in segment 3. We're going to run back the in-house simulation for Locked On across segments 1 and 2. And then I'll talk a little bit in segment 3, and that'll be it for today's show. So with that, let's get right to it.
Nick Engstead here from the Locked On NBA podcast to bring you our lottery mock draft. I went to Tankathon, did a simulation, and this is how it turned out. We had a little bit of work at the top. The Orlando Magic slide up to the number 1 pick. Oklahoma City slides up 2 spots to get number 2. Houston falls to number 3. Detroit falls to number 4. And then it goes chalk from there with the Pacers, Blazers, Kings, Pelicans, Spurs, Wizards, Knicks, Thunder again, Charlotte Hornets, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers round out the lottery. We are going to go one by one to each of our Locked On hosts to get their pick, who they would pick if their team actually falls in this spot.
With the first pick of the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Orlando Magic select PAOLO BANCHERO. I'm Philip Rosenreich, the host of the Locked On Magic podcast, and the reason the Magic take PAOLO BANCHERO is quite simple. They need a guy who can create his own shot. They need a guy who can be a primary scorer. They've got a lot of great secondary players. They got a lot of really good young talent. but they need a guy that they can truly orbit around. And what we saw during the NCAA tournament, what we saw all year at Duke, was Paolo Banchero is that star kind of player, a guy who can work from the outside and the inside, a guy who has size and defensive potential and capabilities, but really this is about adding his scoring and his scoring ability. This is a guy who's got tremendous footwork and just is a tremendous scorer, and that's just frankly what the Magic need, especially for a team that was one of the worst offensive teams in the league. So the Orlando Magic will take Paolo Banchero with the first pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft.
With the second pick in the 2022 Locked On NBA mock draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select JABARI Smith, forward out of Auburn. The Oklahoma City Thunder finally get lottery luck, and they jump up from 4 to 2, and my best player on my big board, JABARI Smith Jr., was available after Paolo Banchero went number 1. This pick was really between him and CHET Holmgren, and maybe Sam Presti would lean towards CHET Holmgren just based on the tantalizing nature of his 7-foot frame with guard-like skills. But JABARI Smith Jr. can fit seamlessly alongside Josh Giddey and SGA with his 3-and-D potential. Richard Stamen, that Mavs draft on Twitter, and our Locked On expert, has compared him to Klay Thompson. And so whenever you're trying to fit two guards together that are ball dominant in SGA and Josh Giddey, you need to find a player who can fit into that equation without mucking it up and adding another ball dominant player, but still having high upside. And that's exactly what JABARI Smith Jr. does. He can play elite defense, he can score very well in the offensive end, and he can allow for SGA to take over in isolation and Josh Giddey to set him up with his elite playmaking. So that's where we're going here on the Locked On Mock Draft. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.
With the third overall pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Houston Rockets select CHET Holmgren out of Gonzaga. What's up? Jackson Gatlin here from over at Locked On Rockets. And look, the Rockets can't go wrong with any of the top 3 big man prospects in this year's NBA draft. Being third on the board isn't as good as being number 1 on the board, but being able to come away with CHET Holmgren is still a huge get for this Houston Rockets team. He has size, he has shooting, and he's got the potential to be the number 1 player coming out of this year's draft, a true unicorn in every sense of the word, a guy that you can slot in at the 5 if you're Houston. Maybe you run him at the 4 alongside Alperen Sengun or Christian Wood, depending on what their lineup looks like next season. A lot of flexibility to be had with CHET Holmgren and a very, very bright future when you pair him with Jalen Green.
With the 4th pick in the 2022 Locked On NBA mock draft, the Detroit Pistons select SHAEDON Sharpe, 6'5" guard out of Kentucky. In this lottery mock draft, the Detroit Pistons fell from number 3 to number 4, which isn't that bad, but that takes off Banchero, CHET Holmgren, and JABARI Smith. That leaves a bunch of guards and a bunch of wings available at number 4, and I feel like Sharpe is, as of right now, one of the more interesting prospects in the entire draft. Yes, he's technically coming out of Kentucky, but he did not play a single game of college basketball, so you don't really have a ton of tape to really go off. Despite this, the 19-year-old has rose up a bunch of people's draft boards, drawing comparisons to Paul George, Bradley Beal, and Jalen Green. And any type of player like that would fit, I feel like, pretty well next to Cade Cunningham. If the Pistons do miss out on one of the big men, finding Cade Cunningham's long-term backcourt mate, you get a guy like that, I feel like a lot of Pistons fans would be happy. Could have went with Jaden Ivey right here, but I find SHAEDON Sharpe to be a bit more interesting as of right now. So the Detroit Pistons select SHAEDON Sharpe with the number 4 overall pick in this year's Locked On NBA mock draft.
With the 5th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Indiana Pacers select Jaden Ivey from Purdue. I'm Tony East with the Locked On Pacers podcast. And Ivey's a really good fit for what the Pacers have and need. They basically just need talent at this point after winning just 25 games, having their 3rd worst season in franchise history, but a speedy guard who can dominate the game when Tyrese Halliburton is floating more off the ball or when he's out of the game is a fantastic fit for this Pacers team. And Ivey, somewhat local, going to Purdue, just an hour from Indianapolis, would be an excellent fit for this franchise. His speed, burst, his power, his athleticism just makes him such a dynamic player, and why he's just such a highly regarded prospect. Got up to 17 points per game this season for Purdue. The passing isn't quite all the way there, but definitely showed flashes of playmaking. Shot the ball pretty well to start the season. Looks like he can be a scorer from basically all over the floor and a pretty good creator everywhere. His defense is solid thanks to his athleticism and speed as well. He just seems like an athletic freak who can do a lot with the ball. And that's a good fit for any team, but especially a Pacers team looking to add talent and dynamic play to their franchise. So the Pacers take Ivey at 5, and they're very happy to do it.
With the 6th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Portland Trailblazers select Keegan Murray. I'm Mike Richmond, host of Locked On Blazers, your pass first point guard. And if the Blazers do remain in 6, they keep those lottery odds right where they are. With the 6 best lottery odds, they end up picking 6 in the draft. Keegan Murray seems like a pretty darn good outcome. One of the most productive players in college basketball last season. Fits a position of need on a team desperate for forwards. Keegan Murray could help right away for the Blazers and has some upside to be part of the future. I think they'd be pretty excited if Keegan Murray's on the board when it comes down to it in June.
This is Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast, and with the 7th pick in this Locked On NBA lottery mock draft, Sacramento Kings take AJ Griffin out of Duke. Now, I'll be honest with you, if I had the ability to trade this draft pick, I absolutely would. Unfortunately, was not able to do so here. But if the Kings do end up at number 7, where they're projected to end up, don't be surprised at all if they heavily shop and ultimately move on from this pick. The Kings are looking for immediate impact players. And while I like the upside of a guy like AJ Griffin, he theoretically fits a need for the Sacramento Kings with their lack of wing depth. I like his potential as a defender, his potential as a shooter, his size, his athleticism. Love all those things. But can you expect AJ Griffin or too many rookies from this draft class, period, to be immediate impact type players that are going to get the Kings from the cellar in the West to in the playoffs? That's the expectation for this team as early as next year. They're going to need a big turnaround. That means big impact from starter and rotation players. AJ Griffin would not be a bad player to have on this Kings squad. Don't know if he does enough, but that's who I'll end up taking, and I'll take him with comfort and happiness here on the mock draft.
Coming up, we'll finish the in-house mock draft. But first, a quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks, because if you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA, then you need to check out the award-winning app Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times back on any entry. And it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. Use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. And here's the thing, for a limited time, PrizePicks is offering all of our listeners an exclusive no-brainer of an offer. You get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores just a single point. All you do is use code NBA at checkout. Again, that's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On listeners. Sign up today. Use code NBA for $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores just a single point. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. And another message from our friends over at Built Bar, because look, when it comes to protein bars, you got to check out Built Bar. They're the #1 bar on the market, and for good reason. Every single bar is low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Amazing if you're on a keto diet. Amazing if you're trying to cut back a little bit, lose a little bit of weight. You can check them out. And the flavors, oh my God, the flavors are so good. Raspberry, salted caramel, cookies and cream, coconut brownie chunk. You really can't go wrong with a single flavor on their menu. You can check them out. Just go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your very next order of the #1 protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, Big Boards. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you listen to this podcast. And now we'll go ahead and continue on and wrap up the in-house NBA draft mock.
With the 8th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the New Orleans Pelicans select BENNEDICT MATHURIN, wing from Arizona. I'm Jake Madison with the Locked On Pelicans podcast and Locked On NBA. With Zion Williamson healthy next season, the starting lineup and first guys off the bench are set for the Pels, which means they can go in any direction with the 8th pick. And at this spot in the draft, Mathurin is the right mix of best player available with high upside. As a sophomore at Arizona, he showed off a multi-dimensional offensive game that is tailor-made for the NBA. He's comfortable inside the arc, but more importantly for this Pelicans team that was one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league, he's a guy that excels at both pull-up and catch-and-shoot threes. Defensively, he has moments of lockdown defense, showing what he can do at the NBA level and has the tools to guard multiple positions, but he's definitely over-aggressive at times, and he relies a little bit too much on his long mid-range game when he gets himself into trouble, so there's room for development. With CJ McCollum getting older, and this Pelicans team going to be very expensive soon, getting a guy that can be a lead scoring option after a couple of years development at 8 on a cheap rookie deal, That's exactly the type of long-term thinking the New Orleans Pelicans need to continue building the sustainable success that they are hoping for. So for more on Zion Williamson and the rest of this Pelicans team, that Jose Alvarado there right behind you, be sure to check out the Locked On Pelicans podcast.
With the number 9 pick in the Locked On NBA 2022 mock draft, the San Antonio Spurs select Jalen Duren out of Memphis. I am Jeff Garcia with Locked On Spurs, and here's why the Spurs, or at least in this case, Locked On Spurs, decided to go with the big man, Jalen Duren. He's exactly what the Spurs need to address their biggest need in the offseason, and that is size. After Jakob Poeltl, the depth chart for the Spurs is relatively weak. You have Zach Collins, who is coming off an injury that set him away from the NBA for over a year and a half. Still needs time to get back to form. And, of course, there's still unproven rookie Jock Landale. 6'11", 250 pounds, He's exactly what the Spurs need. Averaged 12 points per game last season with Memphis. Shot 60% from the field in 25 minutes. He's physically gifted, good leaping ability, mobile. He is exactly what the Spurs need to counter the modern centers in today's NBA. A 7'5" wingspan can cover a lot of ground on both ends of the court. Agile, lateral quickness. He's exactly what the Spurs team needs. This is Jeff Garcia with Locked On Spurs. Subscribe to Locked On Spurs wherever you get your favorite podcast.
What's going on? My name is Ed Oliver from the Locked On Wizards podcast. And with the 10th pick of the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Washington Wizards select Malaki Branham out of Ohio State. Great player, 6'5", 180 pounds. Freshman, was Big Ten Rookie of the Year, 2022 All Big Ten, and made the Big Ten All Freshman team. Went to St. Vincent St. Mary High School. Is from Columbus, Ohio. We all know who else went to that high school too, so maybe there's some pedigree there too. But the Wizards need talent. This guy averaged 13 points a game, 49% from the field, 41% from the three-point line, and 83% from the free throw line. Was almost a 50-40-90 guy. We could use some talent. He's athletic. He can get to the rim. He's a slasher, great finisher around the rim, can finish above the rim and could create a shot for himself. The Wizards need talent, especially at the guard position. So Malaki Branham is a combo guard that can come in and immediately help the Washington Wizards. Thank you for listening. Peace.
With the 11th pick of the Locked On NBA mock draft, the New York Knicks select Dyson Daniels, guard, out of the G League Ignite. I am Alex Wolf. I'm one of the hosts of Locked On Knicks, and we were ecstatic to get this pick and be able to take Dyson Daniels here. The Knicks really just kind of need a player like Daniels. You know, we think that he'll fit in great in between Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. He's long. He plays great defense. He can, attack the basket some. The shot is a little bit of a work in progress, but he has ideal NBA size at 6'8" and 6'11" wingspan with very legit guard skills. So we're super happy to get him here. We think he's going to fit in great with the sort of point guard by committee that the Knicks will hopefully run with him, Quickley, and RJ Barrett as far as initiating the offense next year, maybe even Julius Randle if he's still around. So really ecstatic to have him. Almost took Johnny Davis, but Dyson Daniels is our guy. And we've been talking about him a lot on Locked On Knicks, so definitely be sure to check us out there. Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
With the 12th pick in the 2022 Locked On NBA mock draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Jeremy Sochan, forward out of Baylor University. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of the Locked On Thunder podcast, and Jeremy Sochan is likely the best defender in this NBA draft class. Now, at this pick, the Thunder would have liked to have Jalen Duren fall down to them, and maybe they would even trade up to get Jalen Duren. But given the circumstances, as Dyson Daniel goes off the board one pick before the Thunder, Jeremy Sochan is a really nice option to create roster versatility for the Thunder, who need to improve defensively and need to improve on the three-point line, which their number 2 overall pick, JABARI Smith Jr., helps with the number 2, helps with the three-point line and defense. Jeremy Sochan could be the best defender in this class, and you're putting together a team at that point that's very young, very versatile, and can complement SGA and Josh Giddey in the team's quest to get out of this rebuilding phase and back into title contention. While it will take some time, it could happen with Jeremy Sochan at the helm with JABARI Smith Jr. complementing your 2 stars.
With the 13th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Johnny Davis out of Wisconsin. I'm Walker Mail from the Locked On Hornets podcast alongside Doug Branson. And we had an interesting decision to make with the Hornets having the 13th pick and the 15th pick. I wanted to go with the best center. It's well documented that is a huge need for the Charlotte Hornets. But Doug texted me with an interesting scenario once the 13th pick was on the board.
Well, I saw Johnny Davis sitting there available because a few teams above us may have reached a little bit. I'm not judging, but they got the player they wanted, but they may have reached. And Johnny Davis, a player that I think really would complement in the long term, complement LaMelo Ball well because he can defend. He's long, he's athletic, and I think Johnny Davis would be a perfect 2-guard next to LaMelo Ball long term because here's the thing. The Hornets, yes, they needed center, they need interior defense, but they need defense everywhere. They need perimeter defense too, Walker.
Yeah, Johnny Davis averaged 19.7 points per game, had an excellent year in the Big Ten this past season, a 2-year player with the Badgers. I think the shooting can improve. Even if the three-point shooting wasn't great, his free throw shooting was sitting at about 80%. I don't think he's going to fail in the NBA. I think he's a guy that can help out in a bunch of different areas. And with that 15th overall selection, I think the Charlotte Hornets can select that center that they desperately need, along with maybe picking one up in free agency. If you want to hear more about the Charlotte Hornets leading up to the NBA draft, you can check out Locked On Hornets wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at Walker Mail, Doug on Twitter at Doug Branson LOH, and the show handle on Twitter at Locked On Hornets.
With the 14th pick in this mock draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers select OCHAI AGBAJI, the wing from Kansas. I'm Chris Manning, one of the hosts of the Locked On Cavs podcast. And AGBAJI, this past year's Final Four most outstanding player, fits a real need for the Cleveland Cavaliers. This team needs wings, and they particularly need wings who can shoot. They need wings who can provide support for Darius Garland, for Evan Mobley, for Jared Allen. There's perhaps no player who fits that 3-and-D mold more in this range of the draft than AGBAJI. Yes, he's a little bit older. Yes, maybe there's some upside concerns, but for a Cavs team that has its high-end talent, or at least the players I think they believe are their high-end talent, they have a need for a guy like this to maybe cover for some of Isaac Okoro's deficiencies, for Lamar Stevens' deficiencies, and he just fills a need on this roster. You don't always maybe want to draft for need. There are other guys in this class I think they could strongly look at and could fill other needs this team has. But at 14, AGBAJI feels like a guy that could come in and play and fills a real need. It's hard to not like this pick for the Cavs if it ends up falling this way.
That's going to do it for the in-house Locked On mock draft. Now, coming up, I'm going to share some thoughts on the NBA draft lottery, final thoughts on what could potentially happen for the Houston Rockets, best case, worst case scenario, all of that after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline continues to be the #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting, the playoffs, esports, the NBA draft, and more. And speaking of the NBA draft, you can go right now, take a look at who they've got going #1 overall in this year's NBA draft. You got Jabari Smith Jr. at +100 to be the #1 overall selection. You got Chet Holmgren at +195. And then bringing up the rear is Paolo Banchero at +275. So head to their website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And a final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA podcast. From the first jump of the play-in tournament to the very last buzzer of the NBA Finals, Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. I host the Monday show, 3 interviews from around the league. Always a ton of fun. Be sure to check it out wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube. Now, let's go through the draft lottery very quickly. First, preliminary thoughts. In our in-house mock draft, the Rockets fell to pick #3. And with Paolo Banchero and Jabari Smith already off the board, it made perfect sense to take Chet Holmgren with the 3rd overall pick. I personally have Jaden Ivey at #3 on my big board, but I do have Jabari and Chet just ahead of Jaden Ivey. So when Chet fell to #3, it made all the sense in the world for me to take him there personally. But at least my view of it is the Rockets don't have Jaden Ivey or SHAEDON Sharpe in their top 3. I think they're very much eyeing those 3 bigs at the top of the draft. Those are who they have their eyes set on, their sights set on, essentially. And so for the Rockets, best case scenario is walking away with it at the very worst, a top 3 pick, because if you get a top 3 pick, you're basically guaranteed at least one of those top 3 big man prospects. So anything worse than 3, if they fall to 4 or 5, that's when you get into some really interesting, scenarios where maybe you can trade down or potentially even trade up for a specific target that you're really interested in. We're going to talk about a couple of those possibilities here in just a moment, but I do want to rehash the current NBA odds, for the draft lottery. So right now, Houston Rockets, they've got the best overall chances they're tied for best overall chances along with Orlando and Detroit for a top 4 pick. And then the chances start to shift when you get outside of that top 4. The Rockets have a 47.9% chance to fall down to pick number 5. Orlando, 27.8 at pick number 5, 20% chance for pick number 6. You go to Detroit, who has a 14.8% chance for pick number 5, 26% chance for pick number 6, and then a 7% chance for pick number 7, and so on and so forth as you look at the graphic on the screen, and it just descends further down, looking at Oklahoma City, Indiana, Portland, Sacramento, all those different teams. So just wanted to rehash that very, very quickly. To point out that, that's just how the NBA draft lottery numbers are going to work. But what I want to bring up now is the actual lottery sim as we are within our 24-hour window. We're going to burn another sim here really quick because I want a very specific sim because there's a very specific set of circumstances that I'd like to discuss that I think could be very beneficial to the Houston Rockets. So let's burn a couple sims here. So let's do our first one. Ooh, Rockets fall all the way down to number 5. Clippers jump all the way up 11 spots to number 1. The pick conveys to OKC. Portland jumps up 4 slots to number 2. Oh my goodness, this is a great draft for the OKC Thunder. Whew. All right, let's burn another sim because I want to find the one that I actually really want to talk about. Okay, Rockets fall down to pick number 5. OKC's down at pick number 6. Okay. Not terrible, not great. Well, pretty terrible for the Rockets. Still not quite what I was looking to potentially work towards. Actually, this one does work for the suggestion that I had. So I've seen this trade permutation, this scenario floated on Twitter a couple times, and I thought it was really interesting. And it's something the Rockets could very well keep their eyes on if they fall down to pick number 4 or pick number 5. And that is essentially the Oklahoma City Thunder will have their pick at the top of this draft, and then the OKC Thunder will also have the LA Clippers pick in the lottery, somewhere at the top of this draft. So in this simulation, the Rockets fall down to number 5, OKC is at number 6, and then the LA Clippers pick is at 12, conveying to the OKC Thunder. There's a permutation there where the Rockets could, if they're not completely enticed by either of the prospects in Jaden Ivey or SHAEDON Sharpe at picks 4 or 5, they could potentially trade down with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think there's more leverage in this situation if they're at pick number 4 than at pick number 5, but pick number 5 could still get the job done. You trade down from pick number 5, or essentially you package pick number 5 and pick 17 from the Brooklyn Nets to the OKC Thunder for, in this case, pick number 6 and pick number 12, because then the Rockets, rather than taking one of those top prospects in Jaden Ivey or SHAEDON Sharpe, who maybe doesn't fit the team quite as well as one of the big men would, they get an opportunity to bring in 2 of the upper tier prospects. Maybe you look at a Tari Eason and a Jalen Duren, or again, Keegan Murray, throw him into the fold. There's, a bunch of different names that they could potentially look at with picks 6 and 12, rather than taking somebody who maybe doesn't quite fit the framework of the Rockets rebuild, what they're trying to achieve at pick number 4 or 5, if they're just not incredibly excited by Jaden Ivey or SHAEDON Sharpe. And then you move up from pick number 17, and this gives a chance for the Oklahoma City Thunder to acquire another top-end talent, right? Rather than the Thunder missing out back-to-back years of falling out of the top area of the draft, they get a chance to then come in and trade up a spot or 2 to guarantee getting one of those guys, be it Jaden Ivey, be it SHAEDON Sharpe, a guy with the tremendous upside potential if that's something that they're interested in, because those 2 guys are still probably a tier above all the other guys once you start getting into the kind of 6 through 15 or so range that the Rockets are kind of just missing out on with so many of those prospects that, are probably going to be off the board just before they're on the clock at 17 with the Brooklyn Nets pick. So it is a really interesting trade permutation there that if the Rockets do fall to 4 or 5 in the NBA draft lottery, I wouldn't bank on it being a guarantee that they use that pick at that position. And I would almost think it's potentially a better situation for the Houston Rockets to trade around and try to find some added value if they're, if they don't really believe in the fit of a SHAEDON Sharpe or a Jaden Ivey with this current Rockets rebuild, because both of those guys are, again, the Rockets already have a bunch of those dynamic guard type players on the team in Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Josh Christopher. Now, that's not to say you don't take one of those guys because you already have guys like that. But if the Rockets feel that they can get more value from some of these other guys, again, a couple spots later in the draft, then it's a move that I'd absolutely love to see them potentially make. So if the Rockets land top 3 in the NBA draft lottery at picks 1, 2, or 3, I think it's a de facto guarantee they're going to keep the pick and they're going to draft somebody with it. If they fall to 4 or 5, I think it's up to GM Rafael Stone to get a little bit creative with it, even though I'd really like to see a Jaden Ivey and Jalen Green backcourt here in Houston. I think that would absolutely wreak havoc on the league for like the next decade. That said, I think expect the Rockets to get a little bit creative if they do fall down to picks 4 or 5 in the NBA draft lottery. Again, what superstitious beliefs are you superstitious? I can't talk. This is great. Smooth Jazz Jackson is failing as we round down the episode. What superstitious beliefs are you going to be encompassing ahead of the NBA draft lottery? Are you wearing a favorite tie to work? Are you going to, stay away from a certain food, or what are you willing to give up if the Rockets get the number 1 overall pick? Let me know your thoughts about the draft lottery in the comments. I do read each and every one of those every single day on YouTube. As always, appreciate you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, brand new Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. Also, again, check us out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all of that. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.